mentioned earlier, are we recording now? So I can talk. Okay, my name is Josiah Lindstrom. I grew up in Papua New Guinea, which is near Australia, and they grow a lot of specialty coffee in Papua New Guinea. While I was traveling from Papua New Guinea to the US, I noticed something interesting in that you can buy a bag of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee for about $3 in Papua New Guinea. You come over to the US, a bag of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee goes for about $80. And I wondered, why is that? So I started looking into it. And after about, it took me a while, but I eventually figured out how to do with branding. How many of you have been to Starbucks? How many of you like to admit the fact that you go to Starbucks? How many of you don't go to Starbucks because they're corporate and they're just sticking it to the little guy and they're not looking after farmers and they're just evil because they're corporate? Is that okay? There we go. How many of you go to Subway and drink Seattle's Best? How surprised would you be if I told you that that coffee can come from the same plantation? Seattle's Best is actually owned by Starbucks. Do any of you know why Starbucks would own Seattle's Best and sell coffee through Subway? It's because they don't want to dilute their brand, basically. They feel like if they put the Starbucks brand in a Subway, in a Walmart, that says something about them that they don't want to, that's associated with their name. Because a lot of the value in their coffee, in fact, the majority of the value in their coffee is something called a brand, basically. And it's built up by, if you go into a Starbucks, the aesthetics are really intentional. You've got tile on the floor, you've got counters, the baristas are all trained to provide a certain type of customer service, to provide a certain experience, and you associate that with Starbucks, and it's all part of the brand. Starbucks, they had a real kind of soul-searching moment when they're trying to decide, are we going to put our brand on ice cream? Will that dilute us too much from coffee? What you see in the market today is that oftentimes the brand behind a company can mean an incredible amount. And I'm sure Mr. McCoy could tell you that's where trademark and intellectual property comes in. That's why you file to protect that value. So I was thinking about it and I was trying to figure, is there a way for small farmers in small countries all over the world that don't really have a whole lot of say and a whole lot of agency in the global coffee market to exert some more influence on the way that people perceive and drink their coffee? Because right now, Starbucks decides what you think about what they grow. Caribou Coffee decides what you think about when you drink the coffee that they grow. Gloria Jeans decides what you think about when you drink the coffee that they grow. And I was trying to figure out, well, is there a solution out there that can make that connection between the small farmer on the other side of the world and me, that I go into a Starbucks and want to order some coffee and feel like I'm doing some good in the world? And you see some of the solutions out there are fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, and basically that comes down to certifications that say, okay, we're gonna say that this coffee went through a certain process, it adhered to a certain standard, and so you know that people that pick the coffee were paid a certain wage, the coffee was grown in a certain environmentally friendly way, maybe it was bird friendly, it's organic. And the reality is that the effect of those certifications is that they create barriers to entry for small coffee farmers. Now, I'm not saying that those certifications are bad. I think they're good. I think they raise awareness. But for a small coffee farmer in Papua New Guinea, again, where I grew up, they just don't have the resources to certify, say, fair trade, to maintain, like with the regulation, to do the inspections. They definitely don't have the ability to certify USDA organic. And they could certify Rainforest Alliance, but again, that's still a pretty significant investment of finances. And really the reality is there's a lack of an understanding of what American consumers want, because there's a huge gap. Again, there's a geographical gap and a cultural gap there. And honestly, I have no idea. When I first came and went to the Starbucks, I couldn't believe it. I was like, people pay this much for coffee? And it blew my mind. And then, you couldn't get me out of there after I tried it a couple times. I just loved it. So, fourth wave is right now just a messy prototype, a messy idea. And the idea is to use the internet to connect coffee producers in small third world countries with coffee consumers in Western countries using internet tools. So there's two components to this. One is educational. First, you need to train local farmers, tell them a little bit about things like Facebook, blogging, Twitter, and give them some resources so that they can put a presence up on the internet, kind of tell them their story. Here's my farm, here's my family, here we're picking coffee, here we're drying it, here we're putting it on the truck to get shipped out. And you as the American consumer then can go online and read a little bit about where your coffee comes from. The difficulty is making that connection, because the way the coffee supply chain works, how many of you have heard of Farmers Direct? So that basically means that you know what plantation that coffee came from. And right now that's at the height of the coffee market. So what this would do is it would add one more thing to that and basically create an online portal where that farmer could go online and build his own brand, which would be trademarked in the US online. And you say, well, that sounds really complicated. It's really not. Basically what it means is he has a smartphone, and when he gets up in the morning and goes and takes his horse manure to fertilize his plant, he just brings along the smartphone, takes a couple pictures, uploads them onto his Facebook page and says, I'm fertilizing my coffee. When he's picking his coffee, he says, I'm picking coffee. Have you seen the Keurig cups? How many of you have seen Keurig cups? Putting individual plantation brands on Keurig cups, putting the website on Keurig cups, putting plantation brands on bags of coffee, putting the website on bags of coffee. Basically creating the ability for you, the American consumer, not to just take someone's word for it, to actually go online and look up and learn something about the family that grew and produced your coffee that you can walk down the street and drink. And that's fourth wave. And right now what I'm looking for feedback. The challenge with this business model is it's international, so there's a lot of complexity there. And secondly, it connects American consumers with producers in a different country. And so making that connection is difficult. And so I want to hear feedback from you guys, the consumers. What do you think? Yes, sir?
Is there a reason you didn't use any of your other slides?
Yes, I forgot about them. So, let's see here. So, for the visual people here, which is everybody. So this is the current coffee market. Basically, you have a grower right here, and you have three ways that coffee gets over to you, the coffee consumer. Start over the top, we got the exporter. Coffee will be sold in country to an exporter. The exporter will then sell to a traditional coffee industry. This is the pre-Starbucks exporter. They will then sell to the mass market in the developed world, which would be grocery stores. If you go into, say, Folgers, Maxwell House, this is the coffee that comes through this product. And there's a brand there, a Folgers and a Maxwell House, who associate a certain type of quality with that. And you, the coffee consumer, purchase that. Here with Starbucks, coffee grower has to sell to a specialty importer and or exporter, depending on Starbucks' relationship in that country. Again, goes into the mass market, Starbucks throughout the U.S., or Caribou throughout the U.S., or Gloria Jeans throughout the U.S. With a brand tied to that, comes to the coffee consumer. And then we have, this is called the third wave down here, specialty importers, direct buy. This is a niche market, and you'll see that they attach coffee narratives to their coffee. It's from this farmer. How many of you have been to a Chick-fil-A and seen their, they've got a new brand going on that's basically doing this right now, creating a story around the coffee. And the proposal is to create this use the internet to create a connection, which will make it look more like this. And so the previous slide is going to all be up here. But what this is going to do is it's going to basically give the coffee growers in third world countries the ability to build their own brands using the internet. Using website, Facebook, blogging, photos, and videos that the coffee consumer can then look at and understand something a little bit different and unique about the narrative of coffee consumers. And I think this would appeal to consumers in the US to things like Farmers Direct, organic. People want to know where their food is coming from. They want to know that it was responsibly sourced, things like that. So thank you for your time.
So understand what we as consumers would get out of it. What would the farmers get out of it?
They would get the same that they would get when they sold to Starbucks. And they would also get a cut of the brand value. Now, this is where it gets tricky.
Right.
In this model, I think that the farmers need to own their own brands because they need to have ownership in the process.
Right.
Farmers own their own brands. It can also be structured so they'll get a cut in the value of those brands, be it through a higher price for coffee or through a resale value, if that's what they choose to do.
Right.
Yes?
What about the logistics involved? The logistics would price it out of the market.
They wouldn't, because people are already doing this. They're doing it in the third wave, but they're creating their own narratives for it. For example, if you go into Cafe Stella and you ask Mariusz, where did this coffee come from that I'm drinking? He can tell you the name of the plantation. He may not know the name of the owner or the guy that picked it, but he knows where his coffee came from, and that's the expectation in the third wave of coffee, that you know where your coffee came from. So all of this is doing is really just creating an internet communication between, using, what's the word for it? It's escaping me. Whenever a business puts up a Facebook page, Twitter, blogging, you become an authority. It's basically saying, look, let's do the same thing for small coffee farmers in different countries, because it'll help them communicate with their end buyer. Yes, sir.
Okay, my question was kind of along the lines of the logistics as well. Okay, I'm a coffee buyer, and I found this one farm that I'm going to start buying coffee from. I buy maybe one bag of coffee every 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Not saying that I'm the only one doing it.
Yep.
I'm sure there'd be more people
Yep.
doing it, but at what point would you need to, you would have to have a generally large number of people to make that valuable for the buyer and the grower.
You would. You would. We're talking millions of dollars. It costs about $60,000 in working capital to move one container of specialty grade coffee halfway around the world. And the resale value of that is high, but partly because of the risk involved with that transportation. And the way that companies have traditionally managed risk is with scale. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. What's unique about the third wave is they'll develop relationships with individual plantations and ship 1 or 2 containers. But they intentionally develop those relationships, and they're very picky about who they work with. So basically, another way to look at this business idea is it's going to take that business model and it's going to include local farmers in the discussion, let them take some ownership and help them drive a business model. Because essentially, the proposal is to take the current high end of the coffee market and use that and create a mass market with it, where you approach coffee farmers and say, okay, you're a large operation, you are a lower grade coffee producer, but we can help you build your own brand and communicate with end consumers, and that will mean that you can get a higher price for your coffee. Did I answer your question, sir? I forgot what your question was, so I want to make sure.
No, you actually, I think I'm sort of getting it. So
Okay.
It's like it's really the story of whatever individual farmer is going to determine the
The brand.
Yeah, exactly.
And for example, in Papua New Guinea, there are 900 languages and more tribes than that. If you look at the plantations, part of the reason they haven't been able to enter the third wave coffee market is because they're too small. They can't develop the volume on a collaborative basis to where they can talk to global players. So basically this business model says, okay, let's take your greatest weakness and turn it into a strength with individual brands. Maybe you're a plantation that can only produce 2 containers of coffee. 1 container of coffee will still run a busy coffee shop for a whole year. So you have value there, it's just getting lost with the way the supply chain is currently set up. Yes, sir.
Last question.
We got 2. Can I take 2? Don't make me pick.
Rock, paper, scissors.
So I say we go with 2.
Who are the
Both of
two?
them
Who are the
nothing.
2?
All or nothing.
Who are the 2?
I'm one of them.
And then the gentleman to your right there.
His hand was up first.
Yes, sir.
I asked you the manufacturing process of coffee. So how would the grower directly, how would that process
Sure.
go through?
So the manufacturing process is where you lose most of the value in coffee. Currently, there's about 3 steps you have to go through. They're pretty specific. They're not really complicated, but you have to husk the coffee, you have to let it soak for a couple days, and then you have to dry it to a certain moisture level. And it's not all that difficult, but in the third world, you can't go down to Home Depot and buy what you need. So that creates a level of complexity. But the manufacturing process is quite simple in reality. So, but once you have it dry to that temperature, you package it, you put it in a container, you ship it to the US, maybe you repackage it into burlap bags, but that's really all there is to it.
So who would manufacture that? The local farmer, or would it be an independent company that would do it?
I'm looking at using coffee plantations that have their own manufacturing process and are proven quality and are simply at the moment selling to in-country exporters, as opposed to, they don't have the relationships with importers in the US. So basically going to them, taking their coffee, saying, hey, would you be interested in trying this out? Let's take your coffee, let's run it through somebody in their basement that's roasting coffee and selling it on Amazon, and let's build your brand online. Is that something you'd be interested in? And I know of 4 already that have the whole setup, all the whole manufacturing process. They have a proven track record for quality, and I just really honestly need one of them to say yes, and then we're up and running.
So from
Yes, sir.
You heard of Group Buys or Mass Drop?
Group buy.
Group Buy, heard of Group Buy?
I have
Heard
not.
of Mass Drop either?
I have
Oh,
not.
you're gonna love this.
Okay.
Mass Drop is a website where people who want things that aren't commonly available,
Sure.
say coffee,
Okay.
they get together, they all pitch in on a larger order,
Sure.
say a $60,000 container,
Sure.
and they each get one part out of that with their money that they spend. So you can work with other people to crowdsource essentially
Okay.
accessing that coffee. So
How do they divide up the container? Is that
they,
something
it's even. It's a well like
like I
You know
would
how many-
still divide up the container, right?
right. So you'd be
Okay.
like, how many coffee things are in a container?
Sure.
And then you do a mass drop, and if you get enough people to buy all of them, you do it and then you sell it to them. And there's no
Check that out.
middle
So-
step there. So that should
Sounds
save
really
your
interesting.
farmers money and make them more money. So. And your website.
Awesome. Awesome. We got a lot to talk about. Thank you very much.